Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us for Point of View today. A little bit later in the program, we are going to talk about these talks that have been taking place in Iran. The Wall Street Journal today says Iran deal remains elusive after new talks. Clare Lopez from the Center for Security Policy will join us to talk about that. We'll also have a discussion with Dr. Bill Werner from the Center for the Study of Political Islam. We want to pick up on this moral equivalence that President Obama basically articulated at the National Prayer Breakfast last week, and talk about, really, are the Crusades and Jihad equal in terms of their moral equivalence? And he's got some maps, he's got a YouTube video, and we just want to kind of explain that so people can have an easy way to talk about that. And speaking of easy ways to talk about things, my next guest has a great booklet. It's available from Family Research Council, and it's about the top 10 harms of same-sex marriage. It's been very useful for me. And the author's name, and is also a frequent guest here on Point of View, his name is Peter Sprigg. He is Senior Fellow for Policy Studies at Family Research Council. He's been there since 2001, and he addresses the issues of marriage, family, human sexuality, the arts and entertainment, religion and public life, all the things we love to talk about here on Point of View. His book, I'm not sure if this is the latest book, but it's a very important one, Outrage, How Gay Activists and Liberal Judges Are Trashing Democracy to Redefine Marriage. This book is over 10 years old, and it's really come true. Peter Sprigg, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Penna, for having me.
Well, you know, I remember interviewing you on that book, and, you know, we look at it, Trashing Democracy to Redefine Marriage sounded like a very alarmist title to some people back then. Now, it's just spot on, isn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, that's exactly what we see happening across the country as we have judges, federal judges, overturning decisions made by the people, not just laws adopted by legislatures, but constitutional amendments that were adopted, state constitutions, in state constitutions of 30 states across the country. So it is pretty outrageous what's going on.
The latest news on this has to do with the state of Alabama. And last week we spoke with your colleague, Travis Weber, about the decision in Alabama. Of course, there's a federal judge, as most folks know by now, who overturned their marriage amendment, passed by 81% of the people in Alabama, overturned it. And now, Judge Roy Moore, he's actually the Chief Justice of Alabama, has said, we do not have to abide by the court's decision. We will refuse to do these marriages. And, of course, this whole idea of states controlling marriage is going to the Supreme Court. So in the interim, I think states are concerned, Peter, about the marriages that might take place. And so they asked for a stay on this. I'm seeing this reported in Bloomberg that the U.S. Supreme Court will not allow a stay. So the marriages will begin, or they could begin, in Alabama unless Justice Roy Moore's word goes out there. Tell us a little bit more about that situation.
Well, yes, my understanding, and I've just been, online checking online news reports and so forth, and the indications I'm seeing are that it's a mixed bag across the state of Alabama this morning. Just this morning, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to issue a stay or extend a stay on the effectiveness of the U.S. District Court order in a decision that was handed down back on January 23rd. And so that opened the door, or was believed by people who supported that district court decision, opened the door to the issuance of same-sex marriage licenses in Alabama. But Judge Roy Moore, who is the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, is arguing that the state is not bound by a mere district court judge order. He said that, as I understand it, he's essentially saying that until the order comes from the Supreme Court itself, that they are not bound to obey it. And certainly they're bound to obey the Constitution, and the Alabama Constitution continues to say that marriage is the union of one man and one woman. The U.S. Constitution is silent on the subject of marriage, so Judge Moore argues that given that situation, that the local probate judges should not issue same-sex marriage licenses. Now, my understanding is that as of this morning, it is a mixed bag across the state of Alabama. In some counties, these licenses are being issued, and in other counties, they are not being issued. So it all depends on where the particular couple happens to be.
Where does the governor stand on it?
Well, the last report I heard was that the governor had not issued a definitive statement about his position in terms of whether these licenses have to be issued right now based on the district court judge order.
It's almost surreal to think about this, Peter. I mean, it was one thing when they started issuing marriage licenses illegally in San Francisco, but now we're looking at Alabama. We're looking at a state where 81% of the people passed a marriage amendment defining marriage as the union between one man and one woman, and yet the gay marriages are beginning. We're really in a strange place, aren't we?
Well, yeah, we certainly are. And, I will say that in meetings with allies on this issue and so forth, there has been discussion about, who's going to stand up and say, look, this is not constitutional. This is judicial, not just judicial activism, this is judicial tyranny. And we no longer live in a free country if judges can rewrite the Constitution in the way that some of these judges are doing. And Judge Roy Moore, frankly, is the first state official who has had the courage to stand up and basically say that and stand up in defiance of one of these orders. Now, as you indicated, this issue is going to be resolved by the United States Supreme Court this year anyway, and so I don't see what the rush is. We will have the answer within the next 4 or 5 months from the United States Supreme Court, and so why the rush with this for this district court judge to have her order be the definitive one in Alabama is a bit of a mystery.
Peter Sprigg is my guest, and we will continue this discussion after the break. And I do know why the rush is, Peter, and I'll let you comment on it after the break. But it's right here in the Bloomberg story. Halfway down the first page, each new state magnifies the potential complications should the high court rule against marriage rights. When they mean marriage rights, they mean rights of homosexuals to marry, of course. So I think what the left wants is as many people, quote unquote, married, same-sex couples across the country as possible in order to influence the Supreme Court decision and influence public opinion across the country that how can we then pull this right to marry after we've got people even in the state of Alabama in same-sex marriages. Peter Sprigg is my guest. He knows much more about this than I do, so I'll let him comment, but that's just my thought. A little bit later, we'll open up the phones on this issue and let you weigh in. We'll be back after these messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kirby Anderson.
Should America be the world's policeman? That was a question I asked my radio audience when I had Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Bret Stephens on to talk about his book, America in Retreat. His argument is that the world's situations are aflame because America has decided to retreat from a role inherited after World War II. We currently have a foreign policy that is heavy on rhetoric and light on action. A key part of his argument can be seen in what is often called the broken window theory. In the late 1960s, Philip Zimbardo parked a car on a street in Bronx with the hood up and without license plates. Within minutes, vandals began to strip the car of anything valuable. By the next day, people were destroying the car, ripping up upholstery, and smashing windows. He conducted the same experiment in Palo Alto near Stanford University campus. This time, the car, with hood up and license plates removed, sat untouched for days. Then Dr. Zimbardo smashed a window. That changed everything. Within a few hours, the car was destroyed. You know, this study shows that social disorder and crime are linked. The same principle applies to what is happening in the world. If the world is in disorder and the world's policeman does nothing, it emboldens others. A Syrian dictator murders thousands. America does nothing. The Russian president seizes Crimea. The radical Muslim group ISIS begins taking land in Syria and Iraq. These are not unrelated actions. This is what happens in a broken windows world. Bret Stephens says that at the very least we should provide the military with what it needs to project force and once again become a deterrent. Increasing the military budget to previous levels, around 5% of GDP, would allow the Navy to build needed ships and the Air Force to replace a fleet of aircraft whose planes are the oldest in its history. The world needs a policeman who's willing to walk the beat in order to prevent bad guys from taking over large parts of the world. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View on Penna Dexter. Peter Sprigg from Family Research Council is my guest. And Peter, before the break, of course, I mentioned my opinion. Why are conservative states being forced into performing same-sex marriages before the Supreme Court actually rules on this? And I think it's because the left is just behind it, and there's something going on influencing the cases that are coming before these judges, and the judges are, in many cases, ruling wrong, and the marriages are beginning, and we're just going to have this critical mass. What do you think?
Well, I do think that's certainly part of it. The advocates of same-sex marriage feel that the more sort of facts on the ground they create where they have same-sex couples that have received marriage licenses, that have come to rely on this, legal status, the harder it would be for a court, especially the Supreme Court, to walk any of that back. And certainly if the Supreme Court were to rule this year in the case that or cases that it's accepted, that there is not a constitutional obligation for states to recognize same-sex marriages, then it would raise a big question about what is going to happen in all the other states that are issuing same-sex marriage licenses now in defiance of their state constitutions as a result of federal circuit court orders that were whose appeals were not accepted by the Supreme Court. I guess in order to revert to the enforcement of those state laws, you would have to have a new round of litigation initiated by the states, and the burden would then be on the states to try to undo what the courts have done. So it's really quite a mess.
Yeah. It is a mess.
And, you know, Penna, I wanted to mention a couple things about this ruling from the judge in Alabama, Judge Callie Granade. I'm not sure if that's how she pronounces it, but
sounds good to me.
Yeah. This rule, the opinion that she issued was only 10 pages long. This is the shortest of any of the same-sex marriage case opinions that I've seen anywhere. And forgive me for being a bit sarcastic, but it strikes me as being like a person who's been, you know, like a college student who has had the whole semester to work on a thesis and ends up throwing it together the night before it's due. It was very shoddy work. She claims that the marriage laws are unconstitutional on equal protection and due process grounds. She addresses only the due process grounds and says offers no analysis of the equal protection arguments, which is just very shoddy legal work. And also, I was surprised to discover what I didn't realize. This hasn't really been reported very thoroughly by the media. This was actually not a same-sex marriage case to begin with. The plaintiffs did not go to court because they were denied a marriage license. They went to court because one of these lesbian partners wanted to adopt the biological son of the other partner, and were prevented from doing so because Alabama's adoption code only allows a person to adopt the spouse's child. And so this judge could have resolved this case and resolved it in favor of the plaintiffs simply by ordering the state to allow the adoption of this one child.
Really?
And instead, she decided to strike down the marriage laws of the entire state and declare them to be in violation of the U.S. Constitution. So, to me, that's judicial activism if you've ever seen it. Not only is she going beyond what the Constitution says, but she's going beyond what the case was about presumably in order to try to make history and get her own name written in history a little bit.
So meanwhile, perhaps before the Supreme Court rules on same-sex marriage, this case will be appealed to the other courts, and we'll see if she's reversed, right?
Well, yes. This was only a district court decision, so I would certainly expect the state of Alabama to appeal this to the circuit court. And now I should have looked this up before we came on air, but I'm not. But I believe that this is Alabama is in one of the circuits that has not yet ruled on the issue of same-sex marriage, and therefore she's not responding to a binding precedent from above, from a court, which is superior to hers. And there is the possibility that we could have another circuit court strike this down, just as in the Sixth Circuit, the cases that have gone to the Supreme Court, the Sixth Circuit did rule in favor of the state's rights to define marriage as the union of a man and a woman, and overturned district court decisions for the four states that were at issue there.
Okay, I have so many questions to ask, but I'll just ask this one for now. Peter, we'll have to have you back to do more of this. But in a state like Alabama, in a state like, for instance, Texas, where I am, where the people don't want same-sex marriage to be the regime, if the Supreme Court goes the wrong way on this thing, or even if the Supreme Court takes the middle ground and just says something about, okay, we have to we'll recognize all the marriages that have already taken place across the country, but from now on, if states don't want to have same-sex marriage, they don't have to. But so what can a state do in either of those two cases? Are there laws that a state could pass, or are you guys starting to think about those types of things that states can do to protect themselves, or is it just going to be too late?
Well, if the Supreme Court rules that there is a constitutional right to same-sex marriage that states must recognize, it would precipitate a constitutional crisis if a state were to try to defy that. The ultimate check and balance, of course, on judges is removing them from office. and that's something that was done in Iowa when the Iowa State Supreme Court ruled in favor of same-sex marriage. In Iowa, they have retention elections for judges, and 3 judges were removed from office by the voters. Now, with federal judges, it requires impeachment. So whether there would be the political will to impeach judges because of this, is to be candid, it's questionable. And whether there would be the political will to defy the court's order, as Judge Moore is trying to get judges to do with respect to the district court in Alabama, is also questionable. So I think if we lose in the Supreme Court, we are going to be in a situation where the next battle will be defending religious liberty in light of the new realities, which will be very hostile to the religious liberty of people who believe in the natural definition of marriage. And that's a battle that's already underway with respect to, for example, businesses in the wedding industry that don't want to participate in the celebration of same-sex weddings and so forth. Those battles will become even more challenging if the Supreme Court goes the wrong way on this issue.
Marriage is really the tip of the spear with regard to these attacks on religious liberty. I hope the Supreme Court rules the right way, the way we want it to, Peter. I'm not all that optimistic about it, but, we'll see. I just want to mention your book, though. We just have a minute. Tell us about the top 10 harms of same-sex marriage. It's still a good tool for people, isn't it?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, this is a pamphlet that we published here at Family Research Council a few years ago. It's available on our website at frc.org. And this was an effort to address the issue that sometimes hasn't even been addressed very adequately in some of these court cases. And people say, all right, well, you may not like homosexuality, or you may not believe in same-sex marriage, but what harm would it do? What harm could it possibly do? And that's an answer. That's a question that some people struggle to come up with answers for. But I've got at least 10 answers in this pamphlet of the specific harms that would be caused to society by redefining marriage to include same-sex unions. And they range from immediate harms, such as the religious liberty issues that we were just discussing. There are long-term harms that come from undermining the social message of marriage, that society needs children and children need a mother and a father.
I've got to jump in because we're hitting a hard break. So folks, get the booklet. Go to frc.org.
Okay.
Or just go to pointofview.net. You can click in there and get the booklet. We've actually put it up there under Peter's bio and picture. Peter Sprigg, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Penna.
And give us a call if you'd like to weigh in on this issue, 800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Leadership in the House of Representatives calls it a border security bill. Kenneth Palinkas, who represents Immigration Service personnel, calls it a global joke, writing that it, quote, does nothing to preclude anyone in the world from turning themselves in at the U.S. border and obtaining automatic entry and federal benefits. In other words, he's saying it's a welcome mat and free stuff. Does that sound like border security to you? Point of View developed its Take Action system for issues like this to help make your voice heard by your elected officials. Visit pointofview.net right now and click on the gray Take Action button near the top of the screen. That's the gray Take Action button. We've also got it linked in the middle of the front page under the pictures of today's guests. Kirby Anderson says border security is a serious issue that deserves real solutions. Take action now at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Thank you for taking action to speak up in defense of the nation. Pointofview.net. Take action. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
We're talking about marriage, and there are so many reasons why we should be in support of keeping marriages between one man and one woman. And Peter Sprigg was my guest, and his booklet, which FRC has, The Top 10 Harms of Same-Sex Marriage, is available. You can just click through pointofview.net to find it, and it would help you to talk about this issue. It's definitely going to be a topic of discussion over the next few months, especially when the Supreme Court rules. Actually, they'll hear oral arguments in April and probably rule in June about marriage. And there's a couple things before I start taking your calls, and I really want to hear from you on this at 800-351-1212. One of them is that last Friday I mentioned an article in the Wall Street Journal. It came out last Friday, and we posted it. It's called What Will Matter to Evangelicals in 2016. And again, you can get that by going to pointofview.net. And what we do on our website is we show our guests and things today. And then we have, it just kind of gives some articles and different things. And if you hit read more, you can find more articles. And this one doesn't have anybody's picture because it doesn't go with really any guest today. It's organized by guest, but it's at the bottom and of that section, and you can find it. And really, this is something every Christian should have. And hold on to this article. I printed it out for my family members. I've got my copy here, and it's by Russell Moore, who's head of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission at Southern Baptist Convention. And we need to be thinking about the issue of religious liberty as we vote and as we choose in the primaries a presidential candidate. It matters what he thinks about it, and that's what, or he or she, whoever's running, that's what Russell Moore says. And he says this is not something where we're going to ask for somebody to check that box to say, yes, I'm for religious liberty. They need to understand the issue, like Thomas Jefferson did when he articulated that basically people, of course, misinterpreted what he articulated, but he basically laid in our Constitution protections for religious liberty and the idea that we don't have a state religion. Well, the state religion now that they're trying to impose is, anything but evangelical doctrinaire Christianity. And they're trying to squeeze it out from many directions. And anybody that says they're not is just not watching. And that's why we need a president who very well understands this. He ends the article by saying, likewise, a Republican who seems embarrassed about religious freedom or who takes weeks to muster up an opinion on basic questions of whether consciences ought to be respected will find that evangelicals will pay no mind when that candidate starts spouting God and country talk. He says religious liberty is too important to see it become one more culture war wedge issue. And that's the thing, is they're using same-sex marriage now to go after people's livelihood, ability to run a business. And this is happening throughout the country, even at the local level, as we've talked about. So you need to study up on it. Keep listening to Point of View. Stay involved with our website because we post a lot of information about it. And especially now, go to pointofview.net and get this article, What Will Matter to Evangelicals in 2016. Well, the piece that prompted this discussion I just had with Peter Sprigg comes out of Bloomberg, and it says that the U.S. Supreme Court cleared the way for same-sex weddings to start in Alabama. And I don't know if Alabama's had the highest percentage of people voting to protect marriage, but it's got to be one of the highest in the country. 81% of their people voted to define marriages between one man and one woman, but the judge there that he mentioned struck that down. And the state requested a stay of those marriages. They were ordered to begin today. The state requested a stay, but in a 7-2 order, the U.S. Supreme Court justices rejected Alabama's bid to stop this trial judge's legalization order from taking effect today. The state now will become the 37th where gays can marry. Justices Antonin Scalia and Clarence Thomas were the two dissenters. Where were the other conservatives? I don't know. The rebuff brings gay marriage to a state whose Chief Justice Roy Moore has told officials not to comply. Some are complying, some are not. The Alabama request was the first to reach the high court since its January 16th decision to take up the issue. So the Supreme Court's taking up the issue, but they're still pushing in these conservative states to get them to begin the marriages. Previously, the justices had let gay marriage start in, here's some other conservative states where they are starting: Idaho, Alaska, and, of course, Florida. They're kind of mixed. Each new state magnifies the potential complications should the high court rule against marriage rights. A ruling potentially would nullify lower court decisions that have required states to issue licenses, creating uncertainty about the rights of people who wed in the interim. So the Supreme Court could do the right thing. They could say that, no, we don't find a right to same-sex marriage in the U.S. Constitution. States do not have to marry. That would be great if they would do that. They'll probably maybe address the issue of the marriages that have already taken place. Would those marriages be invalidated, or would they still be allowed to stand? A federal judge in Mobile struck down Alabama's ban last month. This is the judge. It was an adoption case, really, but it turned into overturning the same-sex marriage, or the marriage law. A federal appeals court in Atlanta refused to step in, prompting Alabama Attorney General Luther Strange to turn to the Supreme Court. Governor Robert A. Bentley supported Strange's request. So the Supreme Court, in my opinion, the Supreme Court should have allowed these stays to take place until they rule. And so, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, it's a matter for prayer, because that's about all we can do about the Supreme Court. But the High Court is going to hear these arguments in late April. They'll probably rule in late June. The number of gay marriage states has tripled since 2013, when the Supreme Court weighed in on the Defense of Marriage Act. So it's a little bit depressing. Now, let's talk about it. 800-351-1212. Let's go to Georgia, and we will speak with Antoine. Hi, Antoine. Thanks for calling in.
Yes, how you doing?
Great.
Yes, I was just listening, and my thing is, as a people, do we not know that God is watching everything with, what's going on with same-sex marriage? And I mean, my thing is, do we not read our Bible? And it clearly tells us, in Genesis, man and woman, and that was the first marriage. And also,
right.
It speaks about same-sex marriage in Leviticus. It tells you a woman shouldn't, lay with woman, or man shouldn't.
Yeah, it's about
with
homosexuality itself.
And my thing is just, are we just disregarding what God's word says, in the Bible? I mean, do we not care? I mean, because, in the end, we're going to have to, everybody in this world going to have to give account of what they, what they've done. And my thing is, we need to get things right now before it's too late.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think most people don't believe the Bible. They don't read the Bible or know the Bible. We've kind of lost the Christian consensus in the country. So many of us are very disturbed to see us going in this direction. And, people have been doing the best they can to stop it, I think. At least the conservatives in government. Now, the pastors may have been able to do more along the way. I think they could have done more, but a lot of them just want to stay out of it.
Yeah, and I'm not a Bible scholar, but I know how to go in the back, in the corner and look up, marriage or
yeah.
Any
Yeah, but people are not Antoine. That's you. You're a believer. The people that are making these decisions for us, the Bible is the last place they're going to go to look for direction.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you for your call. He's saying what we all understand and know, and it would be nice if we had more believers in the courts that were judging and making these rulings, but we don't. And not only do we not have that, we don't have people that are following the Constitution. They're really implementing an agenda through the courts. That's what's happened with it. So we will continue to take your calls here at Point of View, 800-351-1212. Let's go to Bob in the state of New Hampshire. Hi, Bob. You're on Point of View.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to point out that we're the only empire in the history of the world to even have gay marriage. Rome is not known to be a mall, was not known for its morals. They didn't even have it.
Yeah, that's true. They had rampant homosexuality at the end, but they didn't have same-sex marriage.
They didn't go that far. They didn't have gay marriage.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, Bob. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, it is not good for the culture of the society. It's just the common sense biological part of it, first of all, just replacing the population and being fruitful and multiplying, which is what we have to do to survive. That will be lessened greatly if same-sex marriage becomes as rampant as it could. I don't know if it will just, if it becomes legalized, could it just peter out after a while because just natural consequences? I mean, that's too bad if we have to wait for that. Stay with us. We'll take more of your calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We're taking your calls here at Point of View, and we are talking about today's news, really, that marriages are beginning in the state of Alabama, and why that's important, because it's already taking place in 36 other states, is because it passed its marriage amendment by 81%. It was struck down, and the Supreme Court has refused to stop the marriages from having to begin. Now, they do have a very courageous Chief Justice who is giving cover to any locality across the state who does not want to perform these marriages. And so it's a mixed bag, Peter Sprigg told us from Family Research Council. I think this is a serious issue when they're forcing same-sex marriage on the most conservative states in the country. So much for tolerance and letting people live their lives the way they want to, which is what they say they want. Let's go back to the phones. We're taking your calls on this issue. We'll go into the state of Georgia and speak with Terry. Hi, Terry. Thanks for calling in.
Hi, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I think I love your show. I just found it last Friday. I heard the show last Friday. I think that you are the one of the few, if not the only one that I've heard that has actually got their pulse on the average person and what the average Christian thinks in this country. I mean, I'm not saying I'm serious about that. I'm very sincere. I think you nailed it, and I also think responding to what your guest was talking about. I think the only option that's going to be left for states, if the federal government continues to trample upon the Constitution and Christians, the states are going to be left with no choice other than to secede from the Union. That may sound far-fetched, but it happened before. It can happen again. And, think about this. Now, I'm a Christian. I'm a believer. I love the Lord. I know the Lord, and He knows me. Here's what I was going to say. We have a president that claims to be a Christian. However, he is for abortion. That makes no sense. It doesn't go together. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know. You have to educate people on what the Bible says. Hey, I want to comment on your secede thought. And, I know. I think states may want to secede. Some states may think about it, but I'm wondering do you think enough people care about this issue to support secession by their state?
I think it's a regional thing. People in the South, especially in the Deep South, absolutely they would secede from the Union. But the federal government, and what's going to happen is the states are going to have to wake up. I mean, they're doing it with immigration. They're doing it with abortion. They're trampling. Even it mentions something else. It mentions God by name in our Constitution, but nobody recognizes that. And I think you're exactly correct when you say the same-sex marriage. People are going to say that, well, there's so many same-sex marriages now that we just can't stop them. I mean, it's just out of control. I mean, it would be unfair to those people. But what about unfair to Christians and Christian values? They only say one side of the story. What about my values? I'm a Christian. We homeschool our daughter because we don't want her subjected to the things at the school, and plus we want her to have a Christian background as far as her schooling, and she tested in the top 2% of the state, so something must be going right.
Yeah, you're doing something right.
Exactly. I think.
Hey, we're going to do a show on homeschooling a week from today, on Monday. We're going to dedicate the whole program to homeschooling.
Oh,
so
that's fantastic.
Please listen that day. I'm excited about it. We've actually, this program's been around a long time, and in the early days of homeschooling, the founder of this program, Marlon Maddox, was actually was a little skeptical of it until he started interviewing some of the homeschooling leaders, and then he became a real booster for homeschooling. And so I wanted to bring that back. I'm going to be doing that next Monday. Thank you for calling in. You just make too much common sense and also spiritual sense, Terry. We appreciate your call.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your show. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Robert in Louisiana. Hi, Robert. Thanks for calling in.
Hi there. I was just curious, thinking about the legal aspect. I was brought up that you basically can have the right to do things until it infringes on someone else's right. Wouldn't, the Christian point of view, making a preacher or a pastor or a minister or anything of that nature, making them go against their religious beliefs and marrying a same-sex marriage, isn't that infringing on their religious beliefs? Isn't that their right for freedom of religion?
I think it is. Now, right now, they say that it will not force pastors to do the marriages. I don't know whether that will, that protection for pastors will stand. That's what I've talked to. I've heard a little bit of buzz this morning that in the Supreme Court decision that's going to come down now, some of the briefs may go in and really argue for religious freedom protections in the Supreme Court ruling, because if they go the wrong way, they had better put some things in to protect the pastors and Also, even just the businesses. I mean, these wedding businesses are they're losing their businesses because they won't be part of the same-sex marriage.
Yeah, that's the other one that I have heard about, that, with their freedom of religion and them telling them they have to go against their religious beliefs because someone else wants it. Why don't that person just go to another cake maker or whatever?
Right, exactly. There are plenty that will do the work for them. Thank you very much, Robert, for your call. I want to take one more quick call from Kay in Missouri. Kay, thank you for calling in. I just want you to make your point really quickly. We only have about a minute.
Okay, I am the mother of the homosexual child, and I have both those that are homosexuals, him, and then I have my other children. And this, I can tell you my son wasn't born that way. I can tell you the day when he was molested, and from that day on he slept in a fetal position with his head covered. We didn't understand what had happened for years. But what you're doing is, when they do this, they're taking the rights of my other children, who I benefit from them because I have grandchildren, and giving rights to my other son who, although he has had something bad happen to him, he is in his choice now. He made this choice to stay that way. And I know it's a hard thing, but it is our Christian belief, and I have some children who are living together and not married. I don't tell them that's okay either. I stand for what I believe, and I believe that in our Christian walk and in our Christian lives, we have a right in the United States, maybe not every country, but this country, we have a right to that belief, and the government does not have a right to usurp our authority over our children.
Okay, Kay, that was an awesome point. Very succinct. Thank you very much for sharing it. We needed that personal aspect here. And, we've gone from tolerance for homosexuals, which is what was being asked for in the beginning, to the tyranny now of the homosexual agenda, and it's affecting the masses of the population, the majority. So I want to just do a little pivot here right before the break. We've talked a lot lately about immigration, and certainly the Congress is still trying to figure out whether to fund the Department of Homeland Security or not. It's supposed to be in exchange for President Obama backing off on his executive order that would legalize about 4 million illegals. But there's common sense ways to deal with this, and one is to get the border secure first. And I just wanted to read a quote from Ben Sass, who is senator from Nebraska. He took a trip to the border, and he says Washington talks about the border as if it isn't a real and dangerous place, with men and women increasingly, and even children. Getting serious about securing our southern border starts by honestly assessing the challenges we face and setting high goals with data-driven metrics to hold Washington accountable. I'm eager, he says, to take the lessons we've learned here to Congress so we can begin tackling these problems with real solutions. Our Take Action item at Point of View is all about that. And you can hear more if you'll just listen to our announcer. And we'll be right back after this.
When you're listening to or watching network news, do you ever start talking to the newsreader or anchor person? Come on, you can admit it, you do, don't you? You can't believe what you're hearing, and you feel the need to correct them. Sometimes you almost feel like you're living in a different world, and you are. People who deny God are living in a world of make-believe. The next time you're shaking your head at the news, I want you to do something. Pick up the phone or write a check or visit us online and give. Point of View brings you a biblically informed analysis of what's happening, but to do it, we need your partnership. Visit pointofview.net and click the link next to Donate Now where it says Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Or mail your donation for this month to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. That's Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Don't just shake your head. Make a difference. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Ever since the National Prayer Breakfast last week, where President Obama sort of stirred things up by really equivocating or making morally equivalent Christianity and radical Islam. I mean, he really did that in his talk, just the way he presented things, and certainly talked about the Crusades, which happened over 1,000 years ago, and equated that with jihad. And, you know, I just don't want to let that go by without talking about it a little more. And so we're going to give you a little bit of factual information and send you to a video. But first, let's just go back to that speech and listen to the one comment that was, I mean, there was a lot in the speech. It wasn't just this particular comment, but I think this one was probably the most instructive of this, trying to make these two things, the Crusades and slavery, equal to jihad, the threat that we're looking at now. And so let's just go back to that comment from the prayer breakfast.
The profound good, the strength, the tenacity, the compassion and love that can flow from all of our faiths, operating alongside those who seek to hijack religious for their own murderous ends. Humanity's been grappling with these questions throughout human history. And lest we get on our high horse and think this is unique to some other place, remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ.
Yeah, the Inquisition and the Crusades, that's what we want to talk about today. And with us to do this and just to sort of give us some historical, facts, is Dr. Bill Werner. And he is director of the Center for the Study of Political Islam. He has actually devoted himself to the study of religious texts. He's the first person to use the scientific method in the study of the Quran. Among what he's done, he's written a best-selling book called Sharia Law for Non-Muslims. Dr. Werner, thank you very much for joining me.
Delighted. I'm glad you invited me.
Well, I invited you because I saw this video. It was very short, and we posted it at pointofview.net, that talks about really what, this sort of quote-unquote equivalence between the Crusades and jihad, and you present the difference very, very clearly, and I just loved it. So, first of all, just tell me about jihad. It's not a new phenomenon, is it?
No. It's 1,400 years old. We need to be clear. Islam was never a success until Muhammad became a jihadist. We can summarize Muhammad's life very easily. He called himself the Prophet of Allah, and he preached the religion of Islam for 13 years in Mecca, and he persuaded 150 Arabs to become Muslims. That's about 10 a year. The Meccans ran him out of town. He went to Medina, whereupon he became a politician and a jihadist. And by averaging an event of jihad on the average of every 6 weeks for the last 9 years of his life, every Arab became a Muslim. So it was politics and jihad that made Islam powerful, not religion. The religion of Islam, which deals with avoiding hell and going to Islamic paradise, is not a subject I have any interest in whatsoever at all. But the politics, that which affects the kafir, the non-Muslim, is all that I deal in.
What is that word you just used?
Kafir, K-A-F-I-R.
What is that?
You have heard it translated as infidel, but that is not a good translation. It's anyone who rejects the idea that Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. So I'm a kafir. I always identify myself, particularly if I'm dealing with Muslims. It's their little inside dirty word. They like to charm Christians and say, oh, you're the people of the book. Jews, you're the people of the book. But really, they're kafirs. And 51% of Islamic doctrine deals with the kafir. Not how to be a good Muslim, but what to do with the kafir.
And what do you do to deal with a kafir?
Well, the list is extensive. First off, Allah despises and hates the kafir. He made some men to be kafirs in order to burn them in hell. The kafir is despised by Allah. He can be lied to. The kafir is really the lowest form. As a matter of fact, the Quran says that a kafir is worse than an animal. So this is the view of the non-Muslim, the kafir.
Okay, well, let's get back now to this idea of jihad, because I noticed in this YouTube video, and by the way, if you go to pointofview.net, you'll see Dr. Warner, his picture and bio, and if just below it there's a map, and that's the actual YouTube video that he made. It's 5 minutes long. It's very clear. But there were battles against civilizations that were jihad battles, really, and they're the reason that so much of the Middle East is Muslim, right?
Oh, listen, Jerusalem fell to the Muslims not because they had their Quran in their hand and reading them particular passages that caused them to swoon in ecstasy and convert to Islam. They showed up with a sword, and they attacked. I like to remind Christians of this, because I say remind them, a lot of them don't know. Iraq used to be a Christian nation. Mm-hmm. Persia was half Christian. Egypt was Christian. North Africa was Christian. Turkey was Christian. Lebanon, all the Middle East was Christian. Well, all of that changed with the jihad, and it has been under the rule of Islam ever since. So, I mean, that's how much Islam destroyed roughly half of Christianity in existence at that time. So
tell us how the Crusades fit into that.
Well, the Crusades fit into it in a sense that the Crusades didn't happen, this is roughly right, 1100, I think it's actually 1095 or 1098, but we'll go with 1100 AD. The Byzantine emperor appealed to the Pope for help, because what had happened is that, for instance, during one caliph's rule, the caliph is the sort of a pope king. He incorporates all justice and law and religion into one person. He had basically they had destroyed so much of the Middle East, and what really grieved the Christians was, at that time was a Christian dream to go to a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and that was no longer possible. So the Byzantine Empire reached out to the Pope, which was a difficult thing for them to do. A great tragedy within the Christian world is they spent more time fighting amongst themselves over the true nature of Christ than they did dealing with their outside enemies. But anyway, so for once they decided to work together, and the First Crusade started. This was actually, every crusade battle was defensive, because remember, this was originally a Christian nation which had been invaded and conquered. So this was an attempt to push back the jihad of Islam.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to pointofview.net during the break and check out the YouTube video, or at least put it down so that you can look at it later. It's about 5 minutes long, so it'll actually take longer than the break. But it's short and sweet enough to give you the information you need to talk to people about this, because people are always coming up with this idea, well, the Christians perpetrated a lot of atrocities in the Crusades. Well, we're going to talk more about it with our guest, Dr. Bill Warner, and we have given you also a tool. That's what we like to do here at Point of View, is give you tools to be able to argue for the truth, because the truth can be distorted, and certainly over thousands of years, it has been. And so we want to get back to some truth so that we can put the president's words into context. We'll be right back.
The Point of View Commentary with Kirby Anderson.
Should America be the world's policeman? That was a question I asked my radio audience when I had Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Bret Stephens on to talk about his book, America in Retreat. His argument is that the world's situations are aflame because America has decided to retreat from a role inherited after World War II. We currently have a foreign policy that is heavy on rhetoric and light on action. A key part of his argument can be seen in what is often called the broken window theory. In the late 1960s, Philip Zimbardo parked a car on a street in Bronx with the hood up and without license plates. Within minutes, vandals began to strip the car of anything valuable. By the next day, people were destroying the car, ripping up upholstery, and smashing windows. He conducted the same experiment in Palo Alto near Stanford University campus. This time, the car, with hood up and license plates removed, sat untouched for days. Then Dr. Zimbardo smashed a window. That changed everything. Within a few hours, the car was destroyed. You know, this study shows that social disorder and crime are linked. The same principle applies to what is happening in the world. If the world is in disorder and the world's policeman does nothing, it emboldens others. A Syrian dictator murders thousands. America does nothing. The Russian president seizes Crimea. The radical Muslim group ISIS begins taking land in Syria and Iraq. These are not unrelated actions. This is what happens in a broken windows world. Bret Stephens says that at the very least we should provide the military with what it needs to project force and once again become a deterrent. Increasing the military budget to previous levels, around 5% of GDP, would allow the Navy to build needed ships and the Air Force to replace a fleet of aircraft whose planes are the oldest in its history. The world needs a policeman who's willing to walk the beat in order to prevent bad guys from taking over large parts of the world. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Dr. Bill Warner is my guest. We're talking about the Crusades and sort of Crusades versus jihad in a way. And Dr. Warner has a YouTube video that would be a great resource for you. And Bill, in your video, you talk about the number of battles against civilizations that took place. They were really jihad. They ended up changing the map of the world in a sense, and there were a lot of them, weren't there?
Yes. I found most people, if they're students of history, can recount about 5 battles that Islam fought against classical civilization. By classical civilization, I mean the Greek and Roman civilization, Roman and Byzantine Empire. I discovered in a large, thick history book some ancient text which had been made clear, and I suddenly realized that it was reporting a lot of battles. And I said, I've never heard of these. So I set myself the task of trying to record all the battles that were fought basically in the Mediterranean region. And I came up with 548 of them, and that is not remotely all of them. But I'm kind of a one-man band, so that was enough. And so I came up with this idea on how to portray these 548 battles in what I call a dynamic battle map. We're on the radio, so it doesn't matter what I say about it, but it gives a way of compressing 1,200 years of history into 2 minutes.
And it's on our website, pointofview.net. You can go see it. And it's really helpful, Dr. Warner,
Isn't
to
it?
see this.
I mean,
yes.
you can literally see history unfold.
Yeah, you've done a great job with that. So I wonder, but when people ask Christians about the Crusades, of course, it's so far away. We don't know exactly everything that happened, and we don't want to try and defend things that some people would define as atrocities, but it was war. And to equivocate that with what radical Islamic jihad does now, was very unfair, but a lot of people don't know how to explain that. So can you help us?
Well, you've touched on one of the great differences between the Crusades. The Crusades were over 8 centuries ago. Let me repeat that. They're not today, they were 8 centuries ago, 800 years ago. But on the other hand, the atrocities of jihad, I have not even had time to open my Yahoo News headlines this morning, and I will guarantee you that somewhere in there we will have another atrocity in Nigeria, Sudan, Yemen, or Afghanistan, or somewhere. So the atrocities of Islam are current today. I might say this. We really rather have the medieval terror unit under control. Okay, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
Whereas the killing of people simply because they're not a Muslim, the rape of women, which is a tactic of jihad, that's happening today. So my thing is, and I'm not a defender of the Crusades in that a lot of things they did were not good, but if you're going to say that they were worse than or equal to the jihad, that's simply not true. Basically what Obama said was, look, Islamic State is no worse than the Methodist Church.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
Now, let me put an oar in the water here. One of the things that I object to so much that happened to this was not Obama. What I object to was the clergy who sat there and took this and didn't stand up and walk out.
Yeah, do you remember when Eric Metaxas was at the National Prayer Breakfast? I think he either introduced or just did a talk there, and he actually challenged the president. And I thought, where's Eric Metaxas last week?
Why did not they either walk out or why didn't they hold a counter press interview? Because, look, Christians are dying every day as a result of jihad. Why aren't the Christian ministers standing up for this? Are they waiting for Obama to stand up and say, oh, they're killing too many Christians? It is incumbent upon clergy to stand up and defend or at least stand for. I say they need to give a voice to the voiceless, because the voiceless Christians in Nigeria and wherever else they're being harmed, in Mosul, Iraq, no one stands up and talks for them. So Christians have to realize this is a war, and they have to start fighting. And they at least need to stand up and recognize every Christian martyr dies twice, once at the hands of the jihadist and the other at the hand of clergy who will not recognize their death.
Bill Werner, thank you so much. You're making a lot of common sense. Before I let you go, I want to, first of all, point people to pointofview.net, to your picture, Bill Werner. You can go click through and you can see the YouTube video with the map, and it's such a clear illustration of what jihad, how quickly and really over the centuries, but it took over various countries that were Christian. And then, we're putting the Crusades in context for people. Yes, there were atrocities, but to say that this is equivalent to be condemned now in a speech by the President of the United States to something that's going on now. And, one more thing, Bill, and that is that it had been only days since we'd had a high-profile burning of a Jordanian pilot in a cage.
Yes. And let me hasten to say that this was done in accordance to the example of Muhammad. Everything that Islamic State does is perfectly illustrated by Muhammad's life.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I
thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate what you did putting this up, and I think people that want to be able to talk about this in conversation would be able to glean their bits of information from this. It's really going to help them. So thank you, Dr. Warner, and I hope that you will join us again.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's go back to the border issue for a minute, because I actually I wanted you to go and see our Take Action item, and I tried to introduce that about a half an hour ago, and I was introducing the wrong part. So I think now you will be able to see our Take Action item and hear it, and then go to pointofview.net. We've made this tool, and we've really redesigned our website so it's easy to use, very usable for the person who wants to remain informed and active. But I did kind of read a quote from a Nebraska congressman. His name is Ben Sass. He was recently elected to the United States Senate from Nebraska, and he went to the border, and he is very, very clear on the fact that we need to have some common sense border security before we start beginning to take care of other parts of this reform of our immigration system. And so we've actually concocted a take action item to help people get in touch with their members of Congress. It's very easy to do when you go to pointofview.net. Here's what the Nebraska Senator Ben Sass, who a very conservative man that was recently elected to the U.S. Senate, he says Washington talks about the border as if it isn't a real and dangerous place with men, women, and increasingly even children there. And that's certainly been the news over the past year. Getting serious about securing our southern border starts by honestly assessing the challenges we face and setting high goals with data-driven metrics to hold Washington accountable. He says, I'm eager to take the lessons we've learned here to Congress so we can begin tackling these problems with real solutions. And of course, this is under and amidst the news that there's a big debate right now in Congress about funding the Department of Homeland Security. And folks, when you're reading news articles about this, even today, you're going to see the officials say that if we do not fund Department of Homeland Security, and of course the reason that's being done is to get a concession out of the administration to walk back President Obama's executive order that will very soon legalize 4 million illegals in the country. It will have big consequences, and it will be a magnet for others to come in across the border. So the answer, of course, is to strengthen the border, but that's the news you're going to see. What is the reality is that most of those personnel are emergency personnel. They will not be taken off the job. They will still be working at the border while Congress works these things out. So any member of Congress that's taking a strong stand, House or Senate, and the House already passed this, it's a trade. It's a trade-off. They will provide the funds for the Department of Homeland Security if President Obama and the Obama administration walks back this executive order and lets Congress deal with immigration reform in a much more piecemeal and step-by-step way. That's what the Republicans want. And so that is what is the choices right now. And here at Point of View, we want you to understand that you can actually weigh in on one bill, which is a border security bill. We think that's the best way forward, is to make sure the border is secure, that people aren't sneaking across, that it's not just porous and so easy for the people to get in that we don't really understand who they are. Let's get a little more control of that. They do that all over the world. European countries have border security. We need to have it. We need to know who's coming in to this country. And so if you want to weigh in on that, if you want to learn more, that's what we've got in our Take Action item at the Point of View website. And we just really want to give you opportunities to make a difference in your busy life. You don't even have to write a letter, or you can revise the letter that we've written to your members of Congress. So again, check it out over the break. And next up, we are going to have an expert on Iran, because there's another issue of foreign policy that's being dealt with not so well right now by this administration. We're going to get some facts from Clare Lopez from the Center for Security Policy. But right now, listen to the announcer.
Leadership in the House of Representatives calls it a border security bill. Kenneth Palinkas, who represents Immigration Service personnel, calls it a global joke, writing that it, quote, does nothing to preclude anyone in the world from turning themselves in at the U.S. border and obtaining automatic entry and federal benefits. In other words, he's saying it's a welcome mat and free stuff. Does that sound like border security to you? Point of View developed its Take Action system for issues like this to help make your voice heard by your elected officials. Visit pointofview.net right now and click on the gray Take Action button near the top of the screen. That's the gray Take Action button. We've also got it linked in the middle of the front page under the pictures of today's guests. Kirby Anderson says border security is a serious issue that deserves real solutions. Take action now at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Thank you for taking action to speak up in defense of the nation. Pointofview.net. Take action. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
In today's Wall Street Journal under World News, there's an article, Iran deal remains elusive after new talks. It says a final deal to curb Iran's nuclear program remains elusive after the latest talks with Tehran refusing to move on a central demand to significantly curtail uranium enrichment. And this is really what's being talked about there. Here's another piece coming out of Yahoo News. Iran's Supreme Leader says jihad will continue until America is no more. And this starts out, Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, all but said on Sunday that negotiations over the country's illicit nuclear program are over and that the Islamic Republic's ideals include destroying America. So why are we still talking? That's the question I'm going to ask our guest. And her name is Clare Lopez. She is Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy and also a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. Clare, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks. I'm very glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so glad to have you, and I just I want to get some clarification for people as we watch these talks going on. And, of course, we want to sort of encourage Iran to do the right thing. We don't want them to become a nuclear power in the Middle East, but some of the things that we are doing in order to get that don't seem to be getting us anywhere, do they?
No, and honestly, I have to tell you, I think it's quite deliberate. I think that our administration came into office in 2009 already prepared to enable Iran to become the hegemon of the Middle East region, that Persian Gulf region and beyond, including allowing them to go nuclear if that's what they chose to do. And it certainly looks that that's the way it's turned out. Why would we, I mean, even the liberals among our government, why would they want that? I think the reason is a couple-fold. One, the decision had been made that the U.S. would withdraw power and influence from that part of the world. Certainly that meant bringing our troops home from Iraq, from Afghanistan, but it also meant withdrawing our support, as we saw very shortly thereafter, in the Islamic uprisings of 2011, withdrawing our decades-long support for the secular rulers of the region. And we certainly saw that across North Africa with Ben Ali in Tunisia and Gaddafi, Libya, and Mubarak in Egypt, and Saleh in Yemen. So that decision was made that we would withdraw. And obviously something would have to fill in behind it. And I think quite clearly in the North Africa area, there across those countries, the intended outcome was that the Muslim Brotherhood would fill in. And indeed, it has or did for a time. Things didn't turn out quite that way, certainly with the turnabout in Egypt. But there in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf region, as we withdrew, it was quite obvious that Iran would fill in behind us. There's just no other option until, of course, the rise of the Islamic State to challenge that paradigm, that framework. So I think it's quite clear that anybody looking at geopolitics would have known and understood this is what would happen. So it has to have been deliberate. So. Because some of us look at it and think, well, this is just a very naive type of foreign policy. I don't think they expected the Islamic State to rise the way it did. Did they? Agreed. No, I don't think that they foresaw the Islamic State. And indeed, they are in many ways naive, very uneducated about the history of Islam, the history of the region, the cultures, and all of that of the region. That is true. But what they did intend and what they did foresee is that Iran would step into the void as we departed Iraq and Afghanistan. And indeed, we saw Iran very actively involved in Iraq, even while we were still there in the mid-2000s, when everybody knew that the source of the IEDs, improvised explosive devices, and EFPs, explosively formed projectiles that tore through our tanks and maimed so many of our troops, that those came from Iran. Everybody knew exactly which factories across the border from Iraq in Iran were making them. They knew the crossing points where they were brought across, but they were forbidden. Our military commanders and troops were forbidden to talk about that. So it's not as though it was complete naivete. They knew and they accepted that Iran would be the hegemon.
There's an article, ladies and gentlemen, written by my guest, Clare Lopez, at pointofview.net. You can go to her picture and her bio, and under that, her article is entitled "A Rose-Colored Glasses Vision of a New Iran." And so the first point made in the article, and I just want you to elaborate, Clare, is that I think a lot of the rhetoric is about non-religious leadership in Iran, that this new generation that you mentioned would be powerful there. But it's not that. It's the religious leaders that are powerful, correct?
Yes, those religious leaders, the Shiite clergy, retain the power in Iran. And I mean, think about this. The Shiite clergy rose to power in the year 1501, that many centuries ago, when Sunni Islam was displaced in Iran because, of course, the Muslim armies that first overran Persia installed and enforced Sunni Islam. But by 1501, it was Shiite Islam, and it remains so ever since. The 20th century and the interim of the Pahlavi dynasty, from Reza Shah, the father, to Mohammad Reza Shah, the son that was overthrown in 1979, those two rulers of Iran, they were an aberration. The clergy, the Shiite clergy, has always dominated Iran, going back, as I said, to the 16th century. Now, that doesn't mean that all the population currently supports or approves of that, by no means. And certainly, there are a great many young people in Iran who are secular and have just had it up to there with Islam. And yet, when Pew Research Institute, for instance, conducts a poll in Iran, as they did only a couple of years ago, using, by the way, face-to-face Iranian citizen interviews, no names kept, no reason to be afraid to tell the truth to these pollsters. The response that comes back is that an overwhelming majority of the Iranian people so surveyed, above 70%, as I recall, favor the enforcement of Sharia, of Islamic law in their society, do not see any cause for concern with Shiite extremism in the country. These polling results just don't match up to a country that wants to throw off the shackles of Shiite Islam. So obviously there are a great many people in Iran who have fought and died, gone to prison and been tortured and jailed for trying to bring a more liberal Western-style democracy, representative government to Iran. That's certainly true. And exile movements like the Mujahideen Khalq, National Council of Resistance of Iran, has a 10-point statement of principles that enshrines representative government by consent of the governed, equality between the genders, and so forth. So all of that said, there must somehow still be some percentage of the population that keeps these people in power. Certainly, the power rests with the clerics and the guns that also keep them in power. Let's not forget.
Yeah.
The regime is in power because of the IRGC's guns, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That's and the intelligence service, of course, and their prisons and their torture chambers.
So if we only have about a minute before the break, so this answer has to be short, and then we'll continue afterwards.
Okay.
But if we were to try to, like we thought about doing, to support the secular sort of youthful movement there, if the U.S. got behind that in a big way, would that still not be effective, do you think?
I think it would certainly help if our government and our leadership made it a statement, and made it a statement of national priority, that we support the secular opposition in Iran. We support the will of the people of Iran to determine their own government and to participate in their own government, yes, I think that would make a big difference. Remember back to the Soviet times, when after getting out of jail, some of those dissidents, Natan Sharansky and so forth, said one of the things that encouraged them the most while they were in the gulag in the jails was hearing through the grapevine that President Ronald Reagan had spoken their names and said to the communist leadership, let them out of jail, let them go. And that encouraged them. Of course, that would be a big deal.
Our guest is Clare Lopez, and I guess the question that we have to ask is, what kind of a player is the United States going to be in Iran? What kind of a player are they right now? We'll talk about it with our guest right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I noticed a quote today from Senator from Arizona, John McCain. He's speaking, actually, yesterday he spoke in Munich, and this is what he said. He said, "We are experiencing a nearly unprecedented period of global turmoil, and we should not view the threats we face from the Middle East to Asia to right here in Europe in isolation. Taken together, they constitute the greatest challenge in a generation to the values of our transatlantic alliance and the integrity of a liberal world order." Later he says, "And yet many seem to have assumed that if we, the sentinels of democracy, stepped away from our posts, the vacuum would be filled by the inevitable progress of the 21st century rather than its worst opponents." It seems to me, Clare Lopez, that this is what's at stake, and we have these high-level negotiations going on ostensibly to reduce the nuclear ambitions or at least the progress of Iran. Is that, and you've kind of hinted that that's not really the aim of the administration. What about the U.S. Senate? What can they do?
Well, Senator McCain, of course, is absolutely spot on with that comment that you opened with there. The problem with the negotiations ongoing between what's called the P5+1, the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council, the +1 is Germany also. Of course, that includes the United States. It includes the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, monitoring international agency for nuclear programs around the world, and Iran. Those are the parties to the talks, which now have been going on for at least a year and a half. And the problem is that those talks have basically given Iran already, even in the negotiations still ongoing phase, just about everything they want. For instance, the United Nations Security Council passed no fewer than 6 resolutions demanding that Iran, because of its past behavior and refusal to clarify aspects of its nuclear program that, in the words of the IAEA, seem to have military dimensions, because it's refused to do all of that, these 6 UN Security Council resolutions demanded that Iran halt all nuclear enrichment. And yet, during these negotiations over these past 18 months or whatever it's been, the negotiators, the P5+1, have said to Iran, and even issued in November 2013, a joint plan of actions, what it's called. And they allowed in that JPA that Iran would be able to keep on enriching. They could not only keep on enriching, they could keep everything they enriched. None of it has to be shipped out of the country or destroyed, only diluted in different ways that would make it less readily accessible to make a bomb, put it that way. They don't have to stop their research and development on advanced new models of centrifuges, these machines that spin up uranium into weapons grade that can make a bomb. They don't have to stop the R&D on that. They don't have to stop the work on new components for their plutonium route to the bomb. There's a place called Arak, A-R-A-K, in Iran, where they have a heavy water reactor that produces plutonium. That's a parallel track to get to a bomb. So they don't have to stop that either. They don't have to even talk about their ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which is the delivery system for their bombs. And we just saw a satellite photograph of one of those new ones on a launch pad outside of Tehran.
So these can reach the U.S., correct?
They can reach the U.S. right now. That's not that one is not for Israel. Okay, the Iranians have plenty of shorter range and medium range missiles for the neighborhood. Our bases in the neighborhood of the Persian Gulf, Israel, but the big ICBMs, that's for us. Okay. That's for the United States. They have them.
Well, Claire, is this what President Obama meant when he said that we'd halted their nuclear progress?
Well, to put it charitably, he was incorrect. That was not a true statement.
Putting it very charitably.
Not a true statement at all. We haven't halted anything. As a matter of fact, all of this has gone on at breakneck speed, even as the sanctions regime that is given credit for bringing Iran to the negotiating table in the beginning is busted. The sanctions regime is busted. Companies and oil companies in particular are lined up around the block to get into Iran and share in whatever profits there may be there. Not to mention all of the behind-the-scenes backdoor dealing and under-the-table dealing that went on even while the sanctions were in place, like Turkey, our NATO ally, trading gold with Iran for oil. So everything that the Iranians wanted, they've already got. And we're still talking, and there's no agreement. And all of this other stuff continues onwards. And this is not even to speak about the sites that we don't know about. Let's remember this. Every single site, facility in the nuclear weapons program in Iran today was revealed or discovered by somebody else. Again, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, National Council of Resistance of Iran opposition group, perhaps satellite imagery, perhaps the Mossad, perhaps other intelligence agencies, but not the Iranians, which are signatories, by the way, to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which obligates them to reveal all of their sites. By the way, Israel is not a signatory to the NPT and doesn't have any obligation the way that Iran still does. But every site in Iran was revealed by somebody else. They've never been honest about their program. Why in the world would we think they'd be honest now when they've got one of the most gullible concession-awarding administrations in American history?
Claire, I wish I had more time because I now want to go to the result of all of this. What will their empire be? It doesn't sound like we're doing anything to stop this from happening, but can you, in just about a minute or so, just give me, I mean, we've had a change of leadership in Yemen, for instance, and you mentioned Turkey, and then we've got Iran, Syria, so their influence is great. So what will their empire be?
Well, let's remember that Iran, or the Persians, have had very large and expansive empires in the past. What it's looking like right now, geostrategically speaking, Iran is surrounding Israel, Hezbollah to the north, Hamas to the south. It has control of the capitals in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, and now in Yemen. That's 4 Arab states. Those states, by the way, also surround another state, which is a prime nemesis for Iran, and that is Saudi Arabia, with its oil fields, with its leadership and administration of what Islam calls the 2 holy places, Mecca and Medina. Those are targets for Iran. Watch the Iranian relationship with the Islamic State also. They are not necessarily fundamentally the dire enemies that they're cracked up to be. Each of them has the same objectives. They share the same Islamic ideology, Sharia and Islamic governance, or caliphate.
So you can't always depend on the Sunni-Shiite battles.
Absolutely not.
Well, thank you, Claire. I wish I could talk to you all day. We'll have you back. We really appreciate your spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much.
That's Clare Lopez from the Center for Security Policy. Her article, and it was actually written the last time the talks were postponed back in November. They're still talking, and as they talk, it seems to be getting more and more dangerous for Israel and for America. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening for these several days that I've been sitting in for Kirby. He'll actually be back here tomorrow, and I know that the Benham brothers are going to be in the studio on Wednesday, so you don't want to miss that show. There are lots of other great guests and programming items for the rest of the week. Enjoy them all, and thank you for being with me today. And also, Andrew, thank you very much. Catherine, thank you. And Chris, thank you for all the work you do behind the scenes.
The Point of View radio talk show is broadcast 2 hours each day, but you can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. There you'll also be among the first to see our new videos, Uncensored, a series highlighting issues impacting this generation and the next. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show, @PointOfViewRTS. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Together, let's go viral. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.